what I know now is completely different than what I knew 2 years ago, which is not just based on the legality, but in discussions with Nolan Williams, this incredibly impressive colleague of mine and friend of yours and colleague of yours, really, that the safety profiles on things like MDMA are actually quite high. I was taught that MDMA was neurotoxic. Why was I taught that? Well, there's a paper published in Science Magazine looking at toxicity of MDMA, observing neurotoxic effects. Turns out, what were they looking at? Methamphetamine.
Oops, retraction.
Yeah, retraction, except that never made the major headlines. Okay, so then you look at the data on psilocybin. Here I'm just going to hit the high points because it's not my work. It's the work of Matthew Johnson and of Robin Carhart-Harris at UCSF. Intractable depression. People who are suicidally depressed. Nothing else works. Talk therapy doesn't work. Antidepressants don't work. TMS doesn't work. Do 2 high dose, so it's 25 milligrams of psilocybin. That has to be translated for grams of mushrooms, but
it's roughly like the 25 to 30 milligram of psilocybin, synthetic psilocybin would be equivalent to, let's just say, a Terence McKenna heroic dose of 5 grams. I mean, you're getting enough for escape velocity.
Okay.
Yeah.
In upwards of 60%, maybe 70% of these patients that take that are getting substantial and ongoing relief. That's an amazing result. So much so that the big pharma has moved in and is trying to create non-psychedelic psychedelics to extract the benefits of these drugs that don't induce hallucinations, instead of raising interesting questions about whether or not the experience under psychedelics is really the trigger for the antidepressant effect, whether or not it's the insight or not. That's a whole ball of wax. And really, I'm not qualified to parse that. That's really the domain of Robin and the psychonauts. It's an interesting set of issues. So my stance nowadays is there is a compound out there that seems to have very high safety profiles, very, very high, so certainly for psilocybin, that under the appropriate guidance and supervision during and after, in the so-called integration phase, 1 or 2 dosages of this stuff, yes, takes people through a phase of anxiety, then a phase of deep introspection. This is also, I learned, essential. There are 2 components that I learned are essential that were surprising to me. One, you have to be in the eye mask. Observing things in your external environment the whole time seems to bypass some of the introspective / antidepressant effects later. That's interesting to me. It's not just about what you see, what you hear out there. It's really about going inward, this kind of trust, let go.
Yeah, it's also important to standardize for trials, right? You can't have people looking at all sorts of different stuff. Somebody's watching Finding Nemo and another one's watching Jaws.
Exactly. And then the other thing I learned from Robin recently is that music seems to be a key component. Now, they've never teased out music, no music, but having music that starts, as he described it, in the distance, drums and pacing or something, approaching music. Then instrumentals, which raise people's emotional state while they're in the eye mask, and then some transition period out, seems to be a critical component of all this and guiding some of the kind of funneling towards deep emotional introspection. I find this incredibly interesting. And again, I would have not felt safe talking about this. Keep in mind, a year ago, 2 years ago, keep in mind that in the late 60s, early 70s, there were professors at Harvard and Stanford mainly that were fired or at least asked to leave for having discussions like this.
Yeah.
And now Stanford Magazine itself is printing this. And this is also, I'll use this as an opportunity to say this because it's really about the listeners. Our podcast, Huberman Lab Podcast, is free on all the channels, but we do have a premium channel. I'm not trying to solicit it here, but the premium channel is designed we do AMAs and things of that sort. Transcripts are available to those folks to raise revenue for research dollars for exciting work. And we have a donor that's been very generous to do a match for that money. And we're giving money only to studies working on humans, not animal studies. And 2 of the major areas that we're supporting are the sorts of work that Nolan's lab is doing, and Nolan in particular, to combine transcranial magnetic stimulation with psychedelics and these sorts of things.
That's great. I didn't know that about the premium option.
Yeah, that's really what the premium channel is designed for.
Yeah, that's great.
Again, I'm going to say this again. People are going to think that I'm just here, kissing up to Tim, but I'm doing that over text all the time anyway, because this is yet another example where you got into science philanthropy early. You reached out to your connects. You were very vocal about what you felt was powerful and had worked for you and what you'd been observing. And I am absolutely clear. I've said this on Twitter. I'll say it again. When we look back in 5 years, 10 years, 100 years, there's going to be a small subset of individuals for whom the transition of psychedelics from these like niche communities, hippie communities, carpet flyers, everything from devil's weed, craziness to truly effective compounds for treating psychiatric illness, you're going to be on that list. Roland's going to be on that list. Matthew's going to be on that list. Paulin's going to be on that list.
Yeah,
Robin's going to be on that list.
Roland for sure also.
And Nolan, I think, is going to be on that list. There's going to be a small subset of people that we're going to go, listen, research takes money, it takes focus, it takes a bravery, and it also takes the willingness to like take something that has been looked at as just like drugs, and turn it into something that's therapeutically meaningful. So yeah, all I'm trying to do is, raise some dollars through the premium channel. That's what we've been doing to pump into research studies. And so you can tell I'm super excited by all this. What I see happening now is that soon MDMA for trauma is going to be available to the countless numbers of people out there that have trauma. And I don't mean just take MDMA and have a great time. I mean people developing empathy for themselves. I mean people really working through the barbed wire stuff of their past, much of which they had no control over, that sets this transgenerational thing that's been going on for so long. I mean, really, you've used the language, bend the arc of history. Like these compounds are going to bend the arc of history in the right direction. And if people out there are listening and saying, okay, well, this is like recreational stuff and it's very precarious. I do not know a single major, let's just call them what they are, CEO or company founder. We're talking about people at kind of billionaire level that are hyper creative and hyper functional in their life. We're not talking about mystic creatives. We're talking about people who, I don't want to name names, but every single one of them already knows this is true because they've all done this stuff already. And I was kind of late to the train because I had such a terrible experience in my high school years and saw so many friends dead, suicide, drug addicts in jail, like wrecked their lives. I had so many challenges taking myself from essentially a loser with nowhere to go to, a trajectory within academia and taking good care of my body that I was like, no drugs. I don't even put psychedelics in the category of drugs. And here I'm lumping MDMA in there, provided it's done with a licensed physician or clinician who can guide this stuff. It's been immensely beneficial for me.